and want to take a seat. There are a couple more at the front for anyone that needs them. I can see some of the Alliance colleagues virtuously standing at the back. There are a couple of seats. Thank you for braving the heat and for being with us today. And welcome to the Aga Khan Foundation in London. I'm Charles Keedon, the Executive Editor of Alliance magazine, the publication covering philanthropy and social investment worldwide. In partnership today with the Association of Charitable Foundations here in the UK, we're really delighted to welcome leaders in philanthropy for connection, conversation and perspective on a central question: is British philanthropy rising to the challenge at home and abroad? And after what I'm sure will be a robust debate between the protagonists and antagonists, you'll get to share your views and vote on the motion, on that very proposition. But before doing so, I want to thank our hosts at the Aga Khan Centre and our sponsors, the Anglo-American Foundation and the Living Wage Foundation. I'd also encourage you to take a complimentary copy of a book from Emirati philanthropist Beth Breeze, which offers a global view on how philanthropy is changing around the world and provides a perspective on that. But I'd now like just to hand the floor over to Catherine Seymour from the Association of Charitable Foundations and then Leanna Etkend from the Living Wage Foundation, both of whom will say a few words. Welcome, Catherine.
And I'm going to wish you a very cool welcome, rather than a very warm welcome, because it's what we all need today. So it's lovely to have the opportunity to welcome you and to introduce today's session. And ACF is, firstly, Catherine Seymour, I'm Director of Policy, Practice and Research at ACF, the Association of Charitable Foundations. And at ACF, we're delighted to be able to partner with Alliance to bring you today's event. Together, this partnership brings Alliance's expertise in the field of philanthropy, as well as global reach and audience. And at ACF, we bring our over 400 members of 400 members UK foundations, UK charitable foundations. And this is an opportunity to reflect on how well philanthropy is rising to the moment. This is something that plays at the heart of what ACF is all about. We exist to strengthen and support foundations and our members to enable them to rise to the challenges of our time. Our Stronger Foundations initiative is a key part of how we do this, how we support our members. Stronger Foundations is a set of 6 thematic areas and 40 pillars of excellent practice across areas including grant making, investment, strategy and governance. It was developed with over 100 of our members, and it sets out how foundations can use all of their assets and be the most effective they can be to rise to the challenges of our time. And it feels like there's no better time than today to explore the question of, is British philanthropy rising to the challenge? At a time when the world seems to throw another challenge into the mix every day, this feels like the right moment to take a beat and consider what we think about when we think about the role of philanthropy, what our expectations are of philanthropy. And we're going to be hearing from our speakers on how and whether philanthropy is meeting that bar and stepping up to the moment. We're going to be hearing about whether philanthropy is in a golden age of generosity and transformation in terms of giving and investment, or whether really we're just tinkering at the edges. I'd like to thank our speakers in anticipation, and I am ready to hear some uncomfortable truths, as well as some inspiring examples of what philanthropy can do when it's at its best. And I hope you, as the audience, hear something today that changes your mind about philanthropy. Charles, over to you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Leanna Etkend from the Living Wage Foundation, and this morning I want to share with you a little about the Living Wage funders, who are a group of funders who absolutely are rising to the challenge of low pay in the UK's charity sector. The living wage is the only wage rate in the UK that's calculated according to the real costs of living, and currently it's £12.60 and £13.85 here in London. But today, in the UK, more than 1 in 10 jobs in the charity sector is paid less than the real living wage. And it's even worse at entry level, where 1 in 4 jobs are paid less than the real living wage. And this is where living wage funders come in. So 10 years ago, a group of funders came together to explore how they could collectively rise to the challenge of poverty pay in the charity sector. And today there are 85 living wage funders, small and large. Living wage funders commit to 3 things. They commit to paying all of their staff and their outsourced workers like cleaners the real living wage. They seek to ensure that any grant-funded roles are paid at the real living wage, and that they support their grantees to become living wage employers. And I really want to emphasise support. It is about supporting and enabling, not imposing. It's a time when many charities are under real financial strain, faced with rising demand, squeezed funding, and increased costs. And charity leaders tell us that in the current environment, it can be daunting to make the step to becoming a living wage employer. So when you, as funders, say that you'll ensure that grants will cover the costs of paying a real living wage, and when you actively encourage applicants to price the real living wage into funding applications, it makes a huge difference. And it has made a difference. Since the Living Wage Funder scheme was set up, low pay in the sector has fallen, and thousands of charity workers have been lifted out of poverty. So if you're not a living wage funder already, I hope you'll consider joining the movement. Do come and say hello later today. And to the living wage employers and funders in this room, and I've already met quite a few of you, thank you for sharing our vision of a charity sector without in-work poverty. And hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
And thank you to our sponsors, the Living Wage Foundation, and to the Anglo-American Foundation. It's great to put that question on the table just at the start of this particular conversation. So just before we turn to our first set of speakers, I just want to share a little bit about the running order and the format. So we're now going to have the first part of the debate where we're going to hear from the 2 chief advocates on either side of the debate. Manny Hothi, CEO of the Trust for London, and Sarah Benioff, the CEO of the Cripplegate Foundation in Islington Giving, and a board member of the UK Association of Charitable Foundations. We'll then break for lunch, then we'll have a chance to hear your questions. There's also people joining by the live stream, and we might get to hear theirs as well. Then we'll break for lunch at 1 p.m. It's lunch outside and on the terrace, time to cool off, take a breath, and then we'll return for the second part of the debate at 2 p.m, where we'll hear from the Deputy Chief Advocate. So sitting in the front row here, Sophia Parker from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and Beth Breeze from the University of Kent Centre for Philanthropy, and also soon to be incoming principal of the University of Oxford's Harris Manchester College, and author of In Defence of Philanthropy, I should add. So welcome to all the speakers, welcome to all of you. We hope for a robust but constructive exchange where we can really ventilate some of the questions that I know are on all of our minds about the state and status of British philanthropy. So with that, I'm delighted to call on Sarah Benioff from the Cripplegate Foundation to propose the motion. We believe that British philanthropy is indeed rising to the challenge, both here and elsewhere. Welcome, Sarah. Floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. So yeah, you've just heard I'm Sarah Benioff from Cripplegate Foundation, which is a 525-year-old foundation based here in London, and Islington Giving, which is much younger, only 15 years old, and it's a coalition of funders and businesses and others. So the central motion of the debate, we know what it is. We believe that British philanthropy is rising to the challenge at home and abroad, and I do believe this. I'm going to make my case through an exploration of the challenges we're facing, and both the what and the how of philanthropy, and how philanthropy is in the process of rising to those challenges, which I think is equally important. So I consider myself a frontline practitioner. I run a grant-making foundation. I formerly set up and ran charities on the front line here in the UK, even though I don't quite sound like it. And I also was a civil servant focusing on the same issues. So I'm going to kind of weave a little bit of that kind of frontline experience into the argument. Cripplegate Foundation itself was started from a single donation in 1500 from one man. Always starts with one man, I guess, for trousers for the poor. Literally, that is what he gave his money for, at a time when charity was done to people, not with or for them. And sadly, poverty and inequality clearly not only still exist in our area of London, all over the country, but is growing. But I would argue our approach to philanthropy has evolved over those 500 years, both within my foundation and elsewhere. So what are the challenges, really briefly, that we're talking about? I'd say they've been very well rehearsed, certainly within the sector, sort of agonizingly so, but also around the world for very good reasons. So very briefly, the challenges are reductions in central and local government funding, fewer people giving to charity. UK charities are now relying on donations from only 50% of people, down from 58% not so many years ago. Increasing pressure on foundations to meet rising demand. That's something I see every day within my foundation. Global economic volatility affecting the value of foundation investments. Heightened public scrutiny of foundations, misinformation, we all know about that, and declining trust across the world, but certainly here in the UK in major institutions, and the ongoing climate and biodiversity crisis. And I'm going to touch on the way, again, philanthropy is rising to these challenges. So first, the what. How much are we giving? What are we giving? What's the context? So how does the UK foundation funding and sector compare to other funding sources? So the latest UK grant-making data covering 2023-24 indicates there's been a 7% increase in overall grant-making, which is slightly higher than inflation. Grant-making by trusts and foundations has increased by 12% compared with the previous year, rising to £8.2 billion in 23-24, which is, to me, extraordinary. This is despite grant-makers' endowment levels remaining relatively flat over the past 5 years, mine included, representing a decline in real terms. So that it's pretty extraordinary, the spend out. This year's data also shows that trusts and foundations have overtaken government bodies as the largest source of grant income to voluntary community sector, although obviously government still leads the way on contract income. So now moving on to the how, because to me the what is interesting and important, but how is British philanthropy rising to the challenge of our times, not only through what they give, but how they think about it and how they actually do the giving. And I'm going to touch on a number of examples. One, ACF itself, the independence of the sector, the funders' commitment on climate change, transparency, some DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work, collaboration, impact investment, and international efforts. And it's going to be quick. I know that sounds like a lot, but here we go. So UK has a long-standing and very rich tradition of philanthropy dating back centuries, with its roots in mutual aid, religious giving, and the rise of charitable giving. And again, Cripplegate Foundation is one of many examples of that with its first gift in 1500. ACF, we've already heard from Catherine, is the leading membership organization for UK foundations, established over 30 years ago, and we heard it has over 440 members. Its very existence is, I think, a testament to the value of philanthropy today. The UK stands out as a beacon for philanthropic giving, where foundations can operate independently. That is not to be taken for granted. They can express, and we can express our values and foster democratic participation, whereas in many parts of the world, including the United States, where I grew up, and parts of Europe, they are not experiencing that. They do not have that freedom and those values. Amid growing global challenges, protecting philanthropy and broader civil society, I believe, is very much at the core of the defense of democracy, and the UK is committed to that. UK philanthropy has played a leading role in rising to the challenges of the climate crisis. So, funders' commitment on climate change, which is extraordinary and unique. It is hosted by ACF. It has been signed by 130 British foundations, over 130, and is a holistic, high-level framework. It's the first of its kind in the world, I believe, and has inspired 10 more commitments worldwide, with over 900 foundations signing those 10 commitments. Catherine also mentioned ACF's Stronger Foundations framework, which is, again, a fantastic and incredibly important and somewhat unique framework for foundations in the country. Other significant examples include IVAR, many of you are familiar with them, and their Open and Trusting Grant-Making Initiative, of which we are a part. And now moving on a little bit to data and transparency. The UK is home to one of the most transparent philanthropic sectors globally, with the 360 Giving initiative, enabling UK grant makers to publish open and standardized data. To date, over 1 million grants have been published using the 360 data standard. And the UK also has a long-established regulatory framework, again, not to be taken for granted, ensuring charities use their funds to further their charitable purpose, and this is very much unlike the United States and some other European countries. UK foundations, I would argue, are on a journey to improve action in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen foundations actively working to make progress, whether that's through things like participatory grant making, something that we do through Islington Giving, and many of you do as well, bringing in lived and first-hand experience into decision making, into strategy, into everything we do within an organization, but also embedding DEI into governance and applying an equity lens to everything that foundations and trusts and philanthropists do. And I would mention here, equally importantly, the Foundation Practice Rating, which assesses 100 UK foundations per year on diversity, accountability, and transparency. And it demonstrates, and that is led and designed by independent trusts and foundations. So it is the sector scrutinizing itself, and scores are improving year on year. British foundations have also consistently demonstrated bold and agile action, especially in times of crisis, the pandemic being one of them. So I would argue that the foundation sector really demonstrated coordination in their emergency response, rapidly directing funds, pooled funding through initiatives like those led by London Funders, of which we are a part, and this collaboration has endured. Another key legacy is the creation of the Funders Collaborative Hub, which is hosted by ACF, which continues to bring together huge numbers of funders for impactful work. And beyond some of those examples of collaboration, beyond moments of crisis, again, the UK has seen really innovative practice around collaboration, including the giving model itself. So Islington Giving was the first 15 years ago. I wasn't around then, so I can brag as much as I like. There are now 20 givings across London and beyond, working together to achieve greater impact. A really interesting model of people coming together in a very open and collaborative way. And another example of collaboration and match funding is the #IWill Fund, which has united government, National Lottery Community Fund, and 30 foundations to co-invest over £65 million in youth social actions. And also, many foundations, we are not just thinking about our grant making, we are thinking about squeezing the value out of every asset that we might have. So beyond grant making, a lot of foundations, including my own, is thinking about and starting to get into impact investing, which is investing which generates both a social and environmental impact alongside financial returns. The UK now accounts for 8 to 9% of the global impact investing market. Again, extraordinary. ACF hosts the Social Impact Investors Group, which brings foundations, including mine, together to undertake social impact investing and learn from one another. And there are many other networks, the Charity Responsible Investment Network, CRIN, and Share Action, which help to hold investment managers to account, and also corporates and businesses. And it's fair to say that on that issue alone, UK is streets ahead of other European countries in terms of impact investing. And last but not least, the UK is stepping up, the British foundations are stepping up to address challenges beyond the UK while continuing to tackle issues at home. So this year alone has seen foundations respond to geopolitical shifts by creating new funds. An example of that is Give Out's Urgent Response Fund, prioritizing collaboration and offering solidarity and advocacy. As government foreign aid has receded, many UK foundations are reflecting on how they can contribute to meeting international needs. UK foundations have played a critical role in the international funding ecosystem on mission areas such as LGBTQ+ rights, and ACF hosts an active international funders network. So in conclusion, are British foundations and philanthropy perfect? No, absolutely not. But we are rising to an increasingly complex set of challenges, and we remain a vital lifeline to civil society in turbulent times. And even if every foundation spent down its entire endowment, it would not come close to closing the gap left by a retreating state. Only government has the scale and the capacity to fully address these crushing issues that we face. But UK philanthropy can and must and is playing its part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Wow. Transparent, beacon, well-regulated, on a DEI journey, supporting LGBT rights, filling some of the gaps in international development, pooled funds, funder collaborations. There's a lot there, all of which many people might say are necessary. The question is it sufficient? And on that note, I'd like to turn to an alternative perspective from Manny Hothi. Over to you, Manny.
You've made it really hard. And actually, I want to start by saying I don't want to be on this side of the debate. I think our sector, for all of its faults, is a force for good. And I'm sure all of us here, that's why we're here. We're optimists. We think the world can be changed through our actions and the actions of the people we work with. But when I look at the trajectory of the world around us, I can't help but conclude that we aren't doing enough. So we're living through a resurgence of ideas I naively hoped we had long since rejected. Quite frightening ideas. Nativism, anti-immigrant sentiment, open debates about who and who isn't English, racist riots. These ideas are not creeping, they're racing back into the mainstream. Now what's driving this? I'm sure most of us would agree at its heart is economic inequality. Too many people feel like they're losing and the change they're hoping for isn't coming. So instead of turning to the ideas many of us, I think, are fighting for, many of them are looking in the other direction. And that must mean, despite all of those great things Sarah listed, that we're getting it wrong. But there is good news. There's a playbook from across the Atlantic that we can learn from. Most of us don't want to look in that direction. But right-wing philanthropy has been working up to this moment for decades, funding movements like Turning Point, who organise students, the evangelical churches, institutions like the National Rifle Association, and they've paired that with support for lawyers, think tanks and media outlets to get this place where they have political power. So yes, the data shows foundations are distributing more, but the data also shows that we have no playbook. The Civic Power Fund's Funding Justice report shows that just 4.5% of foundation giving in this country is going to social justice work, and only 0.2% to work centred on building power through community organising. And that's our first big failure. We have failed to back the social and organising infrastructure that struggling communities need. Infrastructure that helps people come together, work through their challenges and fight for their common cause. And by the way, it's tempting to think about this as being towns and red wall villages targeted by populist parties, but it's not. In London, the last mayoral election, 32% of voters backed a candidate who endorsed the views of Enoch Powell. So what do we need to do? Well, just look at the playbook. We need to invest much more in diverse, broad-based movements that can counter populism. That means funding the grassroots, but also the intellectuals, the think tanks, the lawyers, the journalists, the communicators, those who can help communities build the bridge to power. So, all sounds good, right? But what's sort of stopping us? And that brings me to the second big failure that I want to talk about, the last failure, and the biggest one for me. Progressive philanthropy is suffering from a crisis of confidence and of legitimacy. I think we all want to do the right thing, but we're increasingly unsure of ourselves. Are we the good guys or are we the bad guys? And for centuries, philanthropy has operated without scrutiny. But now the questions are coming. Where did the wealth come from? Who gets to decide how it's used? Why do our boards look the way they do? How is the money invested? And I know there are funders out there trying to do things differently. The leading edge of the sector is moving, but the centre of gravity is still too far from where it needs to be. And yes, change takes time, but the world isn't waiting for us to get our act together. And I'm sure, like many of you, I go to meetings about philanthropy. Every year it's the same topics we talk about, going back from since I've been in this sector. When I go to those, I wear this hat, the hat of a privileged middle-class foundation CEO. But when I leave, I don't like to live in the past, but when I leave, I put on another hat, and that's someone who grew up in a low-income household on a working-class estate in the Midlands, where my parents still live. And I remember why I never talk about this world when I go home. I don't. Because back home, we're not talking about power dynamics, legitimacy. We're talking about the auntie struggling with social care, or the friend who's back on benefits because another factory has closed, or the Portuguese family next door who are working all hours to give their kids a better life. Now, as communities struggle, we're sitting here resting with our conscience, which to me is the ultimate sign of our own decadence. And compared to the problems communities face, ours actually aren't that complex. Got broken grant processes, well, fix them. Worried about your institution's links to historical injustice, go and speak to the communities affected and do something about it. Your asset manager not investing ethically, well, you can change them. Lack of diversity on your board, there really isn't any excuse, and it's not hard to fix. And uncomfortable with your power, share it or give it away. Change what you can and make peace with what you can't. Now, I don't think it's any coincidence that the foundations that are doing this are shifting more resources to communities fighting for change. And at the heart of this is a simple truth. If we're not helping to build the power of communities most affected by injustice, we're helping to manage decline. Now, philanthropy doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be brave. And right now, in the face of the challenges we're seeing across the UK and beyond, it simply isn't rising to the scale of what's required. And that's why I'm sitting on this side of the debate.
Thank you, Manny. So, foundations, beacons of progress, as you were articulating, or beacons of privilege and out of touch, as you were noting. All some very compelling points on either side of the debate, all for you to start to consider. And if you're feeling confused because of the power of the arguments on either side, that's fine. Let it percolate. Have a chance over lunch in a moment to talk them through, and then we'll be back later before you have to decide on the vote. But we've got 10 or 15 minutes now just to open the space to the floor for your perspectives. And what I want to invite is, when you speak, or if you speak, just to say, put your hands up whether you would want to speak in favour of the motion, so in favour of the arguments you're hearing from Sarah, or against, as you're hearing from Manny, or you simply want to raise a point for consideration. And I'm asking for that just so we can make sure we have a spread of views. So if anyone would like to go first, please do raise your hands. My good colleague Elika is just taking a microphone. Introduce yourself, say which side you'd like to speak on at this point. Of course, you're welcome to change your mind, and we'll just take a few perspectives from the floor. There's a woman just in the second row who can kick us off.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm from a charity called Contact. We're a UK charity supporting families with disabled children, doing on-the-ground work as well as kind of influence policy. I'm not sure which side of the debate I'm on, although Manny was very convincing, so apologies, because I was agreeing with what you were saying. So I suppose my point is for consideration, and it was just a question around amazing work that charitable trusts and foundations are doing, and we can see that work because it's so transparent. But there's a lot of philanthropy that's through donor-advised funds, and we're not, well, at least I'm not as clear what that is achieving, like what are they doing, how much are they giving, where is it going, how is it going. So my question is just throwing that into the debate in terms of that is philanthropy. I don't know where that's going.
Thank you for that contribution. That question about transparency, how transparent and well regulated foundations may be, but that's not the sum total of philanthropy, perhaps, to be considered. And of course there'll be opportunities for both our deputy chief advocates and for you both at the end to come back with closing comments. But let's take some more comments. There's a lady there and then one there. Thank you.
Are you set up?
Yeah, you can. I'll continue.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Great. I'm Esther Foreman from the Social Change Nest. We are a fiscal hosting service looking after about 700 civil groups, and look after about £35 million of philanthropy that comes in and out through our doors. Also, grants of people across London, so thank you. Definitely on Manny's side, because we see firsthand what is happening in terms of philanthropic flow for philanthropic money into civil society. We can see the complete lack of organising sort of support and the rise of the far right in all the communities that our groups are in. We're definitely witnessing something that is unprecedented. Sorry to go back to that term. And just as an example, I don't know how many people today are aware of what is happening with Palestine Action. I'd like, can I do a quick vote of hands to understand the executive order that's going through and the attack on democracy and our right to protest and free speech that is happening tomorrow. Some of you are, some of you aren't. I mean, it's huge, and I understand that philanthropy is there to support democracy, and we are an amazing country, but the lack of kind of action from philanthropy in the next 48 hours is crucial, and I can't see it. So I'm sitting on Manny's side.
Thank you, Esther. Other comments? I think you had a comment, Yeah, you can take there and then over there.
Hi, thank you. I'm Anna Bondarenko from the Fossil Fuel Treaty. We work on the global phase-out of fossil fuels. I probably more on Manny's side, but actually interested in both of your thoughts on this. There's a growing conversation about whether foundations and philanthropists should actually not exist in perpetuity and should all have spend-down plans to really address the multiple crises that are going on right now. I think especially given this kind of very unique moment that we find ourselves in. So would just be interested on your thoughts on that.
Thank you for that, and we'll come over to there in the second row, and then I'll take you.
Hi, I'm Hannah Partock. I'm the CEO of Forum for the Future. One of the questions I have, but ultimately to frame it for a sec, is that the current way of operating encourages competition between the not-for-profit sector because we have to compete for funding. And actually, many organisations are starting to fail because of various sources of funding. And I guess what I'm wondering is this is a turning point that calls for different operating models, more alliances between organisations, so that they're collaborating more both for shared impact as well as shared access to funding. And this is almost a response to polarisation, is hyper-collaboration. So is there something in that kind of almost the meta level of like hyper-collaboration is one of the ways to overcome polarisation, and how that then trickles down to operating models between and within organisations?
Thank you for that observation, and the consideration there is, are British foundations sharing, as Sarah was saying, more pooled funds, the Funder Collaborative Hub, different giving networks, are they doing that sufficiently and sufficiently effectively to actually reduce that competition? So that's for you to decide, but it's helpful to have that perspective. I think there was a woman just in the back row, Elika. Sorry to be pulling you around the room in this heat. It's great to have a spread of views, and really grateful for all your perspectives.
Thank you very much. I'm Charlotte. I'm from Women's Link Worldwide. We're a women's rights legal organization. I found both of your perspectives very interesting. I think there are some positive evolutions, but I think, Manny, to your point, one thing also, you mentioned the example of the US and the anti-rights movement, and I think there's also a consideration about how they're giving, which is like completely unrestricted, completely flexibly, completely long-term, and I think that's also an evolution that that the progressive funders can learn from. And I think also you talked about dismantling like the structures, and I think there also needs to be more boldness in philanthropy to fund organizations that are trying to dismantle those systems, that are pushing for legal and societal change as well.
Thank you very much. There's a question there, and then a question there. I'm Samir over there, and then over there. There's two there. Keep them coming. It's great to just get this range of views. I think actually, because we've got a little bit of time before lunch, we'll give you a minute each, maybe just to or a couple of minutes just to respond before lunch, so you get a chance to come back on some of these points. Please.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Delpaz. I work for Battersea Dublin Capital. We have an international grants program in 5 countries. I actually agree with quite a lot of Manny's points, but I actually fall within I think we are rising to the challenge. I just wanted to actually follow up on the point that was just made about the US funding of right-wing movements. I think the really big difference, actually I've worked in the US as well in foundations, in left-wing foundations actually as well. So I was there through 2020, so I saw a lot of what was described. I think the really big difference is who is doing the funding. So a lot of those very unrestricted, long-term, do whatever you want, if this doesn't work, that's fine, kind of funding is coming from extremely rich individuals or families who are able to hide their funding, able to hide who they're giving money to in many ways, so they don't have to face any kind of public scrutiny, which is exactly the opposite of what we have here, in an extremely transparent sector, which is mostly still foundation funding as opposed to single individual doing whatever they want. And you can see many changes in the sector, the left-wing philanthropy sector that's happening, moving away from one single founder who decides where the money's going to, and actually to more of a committee, I suppose, but more of an organizational funding strategy with focus and goals and objectives and impact statements. not a lot of private philanthropists tend to be public about that. And I think it is a pro to the UK versus the US system.
So UK is doing it better for now, in your view. Thank you. Samir, and then we'll have the gentleman there, and then we'll come back to the two of you just for some comments before lunch.
Hi, I'm a little hoarse, sorry. Samir Patani, I'm an independent consultant and researcher on philanthropy and the information environment. And that's the angle on which I would like to come in on. The anti-rights movement, which you're talking about, essentially one of its biggest successes is the capture of large parts of the information environment in which we all operate and work. So, I'm really behind where you are, Manny, in the sense that I think the scale of the challenge is, we're sort of not looking over the hill at where the really broader terrain is, which is that the information environment is stacked against us in so many ways, and it's not irrecoverable, but I do wonder whether British philanthropy, whether domestically within the UK, is really has metabolized what that actually means and how much bigger it makes the steps that we have to overcome in order to be able to get where we want to go on any issue. Gender, Alliance just published a piece on anti-gender funding, hundreds of millions being poured into that. At the same time, progressive funders are pulling out from gender funding. So you've got, whatever vertical you take, the anti-rights movement and those who would like to limit us are, in this country and many other countries, pouring money in, and we're treating it silo by silo, and not really taking a macro view of, look, for them it's easy and cheap to be able to do this and to kind of counteract the work that we've done and built up over decades in each of these areas, but it's not, we're responding in really not joined up enough ways, not large enough ways, not rapid enough ways. And then there's, of course, the unrestricted versus, we must be rational and have evidence, etc., etc. So I think that is a challenge that I think we do need to think about, this information environment that's been twisted out of our control.
Thank you, Samir. That point about the media and information environment to weigh up as you consider which way you want to go. So the gentleman here who's had his hand up. One more there, and just a question just before you start on climate. There were points made about British philanthropy's contribution to addressing climate change, and we might be interested to hear some reflections on how well you think that is happening. Maybe that will be something for after lunch as well. But over to you.
Thanks. Alex Hayes from MPC. I really enjoyed the debate, both sides of the debate. I think the natural entrepreneurist of me wants to sit on there. It is rising to the challenge, but I think the challenges are coming thick and fast, and there appears to be more and more. I suppose my question and point, maybe on the back of what was said at the back of the room before, is kind of, what is British philanthropy able to do in this space? Like, how much is it actually able to do? Sarah made a really good point about the amount that's being given is growing. And actually, even if every organisation did spend down their endowments, I don't think we're going to make a difference on that. And then where would we be in 20 years' time anyway, if that happens? And maybe it links to Manny's point around, thinking about how we bring ourselves together as a sector to understand kind of what actually are we able to achieve? Because the amount of money the sector gives is a relatively small amount compared to the overall fiscal picture.
Thank you. I think we're going to pause there. We'll hopefully bring you in later. But Sarah, what is British philanthropy able to achieve? What's your response to that and to some of the other questions you've heard?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. I'm not going to address each one, but
just for a couple of minutes.
Let's see if I can just go a little closer to the mic. The question is, are we rising? Not have we risen to the challenges. Yes, we are rising. No, we are not there. Just imagine a world with no philanthropy, though. That would be my argument. A few points people made were around transparency. I think they were really good points. Things like donor advised funds, etc. I mean, an organization like ACF is helping to increase that transparency, to push and enable that good practice. But we're not reaching everyone, and everyone is not required to act in that way. However, ACF is reaching more and more people and sharing that, and that sort of peer learning and somewhat peer pressure is slowly but surely changing the sector. That's what I think. If everyone had a spend down plan, I mean, Alex had a very good point there. What would happen in 20 years' time? Yes, we are facing a an unbelievable combination of complex crises, but I don't think that they are not going to exist in 20 years' time, so I'm not sure how I feel about that one. And last but not least, around collaboration, I think that's a really good point that somebody made. And I think things like, I'm really struck by the giving movement. Again, I did not start the giving movement, but a bunch of funders came together. They were all funding in their own way, as funders like to do. They have their own interests. I want to do this, I want to do that, in one local place. That did not make sense for the people of that place. They got together and said, what if we put money into a pot and collectively made decisions on it? It was really hard to do. You can imagine the boards of trustees of each of those foundations saying, what? We're going to give up power over a chunk of our money? No, I don't want to do that. Eventually they did, and it is benefiting people, one person after another, in this local area of London where I work. So I think that's a really powerful example of what philanthropists and trusts and foundations can do.
Thank you, Sarah. And Manny, just closing comments.
Yeah, there's loads. I'll leave the point around operating models, because I think you'll probably talk about that, Sophia, in your section. Two things. I'll pick up on the perpetuity point. I work for a foundation that's by design has to be here forever. For whatever that means, but it's designed to be there in perpetuity. And the way I think about it is, I have kids. I'm going to leave them assets if I can, if it's money or a house or whatever. I feel like we have a responsibility to leave some of the assets we have now to the next generation to fix some of their problems. So we can definitely, no issues with people spending down their endowments, but I don't think all of it should be spent now. It's tempting to think that the crisis we have now is the biggest crisis. We've been around since the 1890s. We've had the First World War, we've had the Second World War, we've had the Cuban Missile Crisis, we've had whatever. So crises will come as long as the planet and the human race exists. So I would make a case for some funds and some institutions sticking around. It's important that they're old institutions. We can't expect the billionaires of tomorrow to be giving money and the corporates of tomorrow to be giving money. We're independent, we're here, we're an asset. On the American stuff, and I sort of put that on the table, and it is here already. We have it here already with right-wing philanthropy. We've had a centre-right government for the last 10 years. NUSC Fund have had to work with sort of centre-right organisations, and have seen how right-wing philanthropy works. And one of the things I didn't say was what's very different with them. They've got a great playbook, yes, unrestricted funding, long-term, but they are about increasing their own power. Those people who are given the money want you ideologically aligned with them. They want you doing what they want, and they want their power to be increased at the end, ultimately politically. We see that here with organisations that are think tanks on the right. We've got GB News and Reform. All that funding mix is in one bucket. They're the same people doing it. On the information environment, I personally can't see a future, and it links to the last point, one of the last points there, that we all get together and create a GB News of the sort of progressives. It doesn't feel realistic to me. And more broadly, I think as a sector, we're pretty terrible. The charity sector generally are pretty terrible at understanding what we have control over and what we can change, and the timescales that are required. I look back at the last 20 years, how things have changed. They have changed, but incrementally. The next 20 years, there's no idea, there's no way we're going to have a revolution. It's going to be the same kind of thing going. So I think that's a great conversation we should have, really. What can we do, and how can we be realistic about it?
Thank you. Thank you, Manny and Sarah, and to all of you for part one. That brings us to the end of part one. We've raced towards lunch. We've raced towards 1 p.m. We'll be back at 5 to 2 to start promptly at 2 p.m. for round two, where you'll be hearing from Sophia and Beth and some more perspectives from all of you. And thank you for the rich perspectives you provided. So this is an indeterminate moment where you can go to lunch, cool off, have a drink, meet some people that you haven't met before, and then be back here in about just under 1 hour's time. Thank you all. See you. Enjoyed the break and had a chance to meet old and new colleagues, and had a chance to relax and take a breather from both the heat but also the heat of debate that we've been hearing from all of you, and would encourage you as you continue to reflect on the motion, is British philanthropy rising to the challenge here and abroad, but when we invite you, you can make statements in terms of your own positions on this, as well as ask questions. So when there'll be opportunities after we've heard from Beth and Sophia, you feel free to do that as well. But welcome back for round two of the discussion. So first we're going to hear from the Deputy Chief Advocate on the for side, and that's Beth Breeze. Welcome, Beth, and please take the stage.
Thank you, Charles. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch debate, so hopefully that happened. So when Charles asked me to speak at this event, he kindly reminded me that the last time he and I were involved in a similar debate in Paris, actually, in the castle on the outskirts of Paris, very nice, almost as nice as this, in which I spoke on the same side as I'm doing today. At that time in Paris, I lost, my side of the argument lost. And I've already told him that I'm quite sure, despite Manny's belief that this is a room full of optimists, that I think those of us who are putting forward the positive case for philanthropy, I think we'll lose again today. Not because our arguments are weaker, I don't think they are, but because this room is filled with idealists who care deeply about equality and social justice and who quite rightly resist any hint of complacency. There are still so many crises, so much suffering, so many intractable existential problems. So by voting yes today, you risk sounding like you're sort of endorsing an unacceptable status quo. So why did I agree then to make the case that British philanthropy is rising to the challenge at home and abroad, a view which I do genuinely believe? Well, there are three reasons. Firstly, because as Sarah set out so well, much good is being done. More effort, more money, more thoughtfulness, and better practice in how philanthropy is being conducted, resulting in more impact at home and abroad, more lives saved, more communities improved, more opportunities created, a better society than we would have had if no one chose to voluntarily, and never forget it is voluntarily, give away some of their private resources for the public good. So the direction of travel is positive. And as Sarah said, let's remember the word in the motion is rising, the continuous present tense for the grammar pedants out there, not risen. Nobody's saying it's past tense, job done, all sorted. We will always need philanthropy. There is no utopia where we won't need philanthropy, because needs and wants are infinite, because things will always go wrong, and because things could always be better. So that takes me to my second point, which is that the challenges that we're facing, that are referred to in the motion, those challenges are a constantly moving target. So yesterday's achievements seem unremarkable or even actually quite inadequate today. We overlook what philanthropy has already achieved. We forget to celebrate it or even notice it because it's just become the new normal and because there's so much more still to do. So I think we do need to be a little bit historically informed when we have this discussion and think about how philanthropy has risen to the challenge in the past. So where to begin with philanthropy's greatest achievements? Well, for most of history, philanthropy has met far more needs than either businesses or the state. Philanthropic gifts have kept people housed, healthy, educated, cared for orphans and the elderly, provided libraries, schools, hospitals, museums, ensured people have access to the countryside, public parks, sporting facilities, religious institutions, art galleries and theatres. And by the way, that's not just the past. Today's philanthropy still supports all of those things. We also easily forget the philanthropic roots of key public services. So social work, the ambulance service, the probation service, help for migrants, care for wounded veterans. We forget that lifeboats, air ambulances, support for ex-offenders, care for asylum seekers, and many other services really focused on the most highly vulnerable and marginalised people. They all function because of generosity, not just tax. And we forget that philanthropy's role in healthcare has always been broader, quicker off the mark, and more publicly minded than it has. To give a few examples on health, hospices were set up and funded by philanthropists since the 1960s, so after the NHS was founded, because care for the dying was not and still is not properly covered by the NHS. And I'm sure we've all had loved ones who've needed the help of a hospice and are glad that that challenge was being risen to on our own shores. Philanthropy has long played a key role in providing care and seeking cures for all kinds of illnesses. I mean, COVID's just the latest one that kind of hit people's consciousness. But I think back to the 1980s when the AIDS epidemic began. It was philanthropy, not the state, that responded with compassion more quickly, that funded prevention, education and public understanding. And philanthropy continues today to fund the search for a cure for AIDS and provides treatment in many parts of the world. Likewise, polio. The vaccine was discovered way back in 1955, and by the way, because of philanthropically funded science. But today's philanthropists, including many British donors, are helping ensure we don't go back to a situation which was true as recent as the 1980s, when 1,000 children each day were being paralysed by polio. That is progress, that we're not in that situation anymore. And philanthropy also funds basic, essential scientific and medical research. If you think of the Nobel Prizes, you know, the ultimate reward for the kind of essential science that we need, not only are the Nobel Prizes funded by a donation from a philanthropist, Alfred Nobel, but often it's given to research that was funded by philanthropy. So if we think of the Wellcome Trust, that wonderful, one of the world's largest philanthropic foundations based in Britain, in 2003 the human genome was mapped And crucially, that knowledge was made accessible to all, not left to be exploited by a private company because it had funding from the Wellcome Trust. So I think that's another great thing we can point to. Now, I could use my whole 5 minutes simply listing philanthropic successes, most of which I think we take for granted. We just have those things. We've forgotten that somebody at some point funded it and made it happen. And as I said at the start, I think it's because we're always focused on what's next, because we're impatient optimists and idealists. But I think it is worth remembering and celebrating our philanthropic past, because it's a reminder that this work matters. It does make a difference. Everyone here works in philanthropy in some way. So I want to invite you to take a moment to think about what you are working on at the moment, what you're most proud of that you're doing, whether you're helping to fund it or whether you're seeking funding for it. What are you doing now that in the future will be on the list of somebody's greatest philanthropic achievements, trying to make the case that philanthropy matters? The British philanthropic sector is really well represented in this room. You've done a brilliant job of bringing us all together, Charles. If you know that you are rising to the challenge, and if the people sitting next to you think that they are too, then why do we feel the need to cast doubt about our shared efforts? And that takes me to my third and final point. Because we all work in and care about philanthropy. So if we don't share stories of the successful efforts and outcomes of private giving, then is it any wonder that the general public have no idea how philanthropy positively affects their lives? People's attention is possibly the scarcest resource there is at the moment. Good news about philanthropy is competing with private sector advertising with incomparable budgets, as well as claims on attention that are being made by politicians, the worlds of celebrity sport, TV and film, all the noise from claims makers in the physical world, and also all the noise that we carry around in our phones in our pockets. So how do we break through that noise if we want more people to start giving and to give more? Will we break through and achieve that increase in giving if we are constantly problematising philanthropy and highlighting all our shortcomings, which will never be fully fixed? Because, as both speakers beforehand said, philanthropy is imperfect and will always be imperfect because it's done by people, and people are imperfect. Or are we more likely to break through and encourage more philanthropy if we paint a picture of the kind of world that's possible through the power of generosity, which is what my side of the debate is trying to do? So I want to conclude by saying at this time of mega crisis, we need more, not less philanthropy. So my third and final point is that we need to support this motion, because if we don't believe that philanthropy is worth it, then why should anyone else? If philanthropy isn't rising to the challenge, or we say it's not, why would someone who's just inherited or just sold their business or just won the lottery or for whatever other reason has got some money to spare and wants to use it well, if they hear all this critique, would they think, philanthropy sounds like something I want to be involved in, or would they just keep that money in their pockets? So our kind of browbeating and hand-wringing might make us feel better, we're proving we're not complacent, but we might be accidentally deterring the very people we need to set up new foundations, to make big gifts and to spend their career in the philanthropy sector. So storytelling matters, it changes the world, so let's tell constructive stories that spark, not stymie generosity. Let's pass a motion that demonstrates confidence in how we spend our days and that encourages others to join us and make it more, not less likely that we can carry on rising to the many challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for that very compelling advocacy there. Generosity, speed, innovation, Nobel, Wellcome, polio, hospices, AIDS epidemic, lots that philanthropy has done. Is it sufficient? Sophia.
Hello. That's hard to follow. I feel like I might be in danger of bringing a downer after such an incredibly positive list, and it's after lunch, so bear with me. And I think the what Beth just shared is an amazing and inspiring list of progress and contribution that we shouldn't take for granted from philanthropy. And I think there are questions for philanthropy, particularly in this time of polycrisis, that we do need to confront and that we do need to ask. Even if it is a bit hand-wringing at points and doesn't always feel comfortable. And so I think my call to action, speaking on this side of the debate, this slightly false divide, is that what if philanthropy could be even better? It's not so much about more or less philanthropy for me, but a different kind of philanthropy that I think these times are calling for. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I should say that I come to this debate as a relative newcomer to philanthropy. It's my first rodeo at Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I've been there about 4 years now. And until then, I was running a grassroots charity that I set up called Little Village. It's set out to tackle child poverty in London. And let's face it, that is a pretty festering sore of a problem. There's no other way of putting it. 100,000 kids under the age of 5 in this city growing up in deep poverty, growing without the essentials, safe places to sleep, clothes to wear, toys to support development. And while I was doing that job, every day I saw the harm that was caused by the economy that we live in, the harm that is inflicted on people's lives through the kind of extractive and exploitative behaviour that drives the economy, drives both deep poverty and extreme wealth, very high wealth. These two things are symptoms of the same problematic broken economy, and that's what I think philanthropy needs to be focusing on. So I want to take you back, a little bit of time travel now, after lunch, 5 years ago, to a similarly hot day to today actually, and only just down the road. I just delivered a bundle of stuff to a mum and her baby in a bedsit about 10 minutes from here. And I came out of her room into the sunlight, seeing the sun kind of glinting off the windows of these huge office buildings of Facebook and Google and whoever else. And I burst into tears. I was completely overwhelmed by this feeling that our relentless, heartfelt work at Little Village was actually not much more than a sticking plaster, that it was sustaining an economy, allowing that economy to continue, that was designed to harm people and to enable that accumulation of wealth. Okay, so that was 5 years ago. Time travel again, back to 120 years before that. Head up to York and you'll find the Quaker businessman Joseph Rowntree writing a founding memorandum that is the basis of the document that sets up what is now the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where I work. He spoke in that founding memorandum of a desire not to fund soup kitchens, but rather to fund work that addresses the root causes of why those soup kitchens are there in the first place. He pointed in this memorandum towards issues around land ownership, around wealth accumulation, around media control. And it was a call to action, I think, and this is how we have interpreted it in the 21st century, a call to action to direct our resources as a philanthropic funder towards changing the underlying patterns of the economic system that we live in now that is causing such harm to people and planet, and an economy that led to organisations like Little Village needing to exist in the first place. So looking at those root causes. So I want to pose a question to everybody in the context of those stories. Thinking about your funding priorities if you work at a funder, what's the balance that you have struck between backing work, which is about ameliorating the worst effects of the current system, about optimising that system, making it work as best as it possibly can for people? What's the balance between that kind of work and the work you're doing that seeks to build beyond that into something that is a better, more beautiful future for people and planet? What's the balance? And I invite you to consider your answer and the risks of the choices that you're making, whatever they are, in the context of the poly-crisis that we're living through. Other speakers have talked quite a lot about that poly-crisis, so I won't do that again. But suffice to say, the ongoing intensifying crises that we're experiencing have turned the world into a frightening place, an unpredictable place, with geopolitical risks and instability and war that has got far-reaching consequences, and that, truthfully, none of us can be sure we're going to come out the other side okay. I am worried this is a bit of a downer, but I think we have to confront this, and it's really difficult. It's much easier to turn away from it, but we have to confront the moment we're in order that we really think about what our responsibilities are as stewards of wealth. So in the context of all that, I think the risks of not investing in work that is about reimagining things more boldly, building beyond late-stage capitalism — my trustees always get nervous when I use language like that, but I think we have to — the risks of not doing that seem really unbearably high to me. And yet the mapping work that we conducted last year shows that just 2% of philanthropic funding currently is going into that kind of post-capitalist work, 96 million. So we've got organisations that are doing this work surviving on breadcrumbs. It's a dizzying gulf between what is needed and what is offered. And you contrast that to the £948 million of taxpayers' money that's been given to Innovate UK given out by Innovate UK each year to support business growth. So even if you're passionate, as I am, about funding organisations like Little Village who are tackling poverty every day, I think we have to ask ourselves, have we got the balance right in British philanthropy between support of within the system work and beyond the system work? And I don't think we have. And I think that this caution is not only a failure of our imagination, but an abdication of our responsibilities as independent wealth holders who can make really brave choices, more so than anyone else. So I have another question to inform this debate, and then I'll finish. This question is less about your programme funding and more about your investment choices. Okay, so here's the question. To what extent does each pound of your endowment support your mission? Can you explain your rationale if any of your pounds don't directly contribute to your mission? So when I first started in philanthropy only 4 years ago, my mind was kind of blown by the fact that we spent so long agonising over questions about impact and contribution, agonising over our strategy for 4% of our money. 96% of the money was being invested in the global equities market, and no one really asked too many questions about that. It was, we followed ESG frameworks, and that put us at the kind of acceptable side of things for philanthropy. But really, all the focus was on that 4%. None of it was on the 96%, which was going into, as I say, global equities market, albeit with an ESG sheen. And that is the dominant model in UK philanthropy still. We are squarely part of the wealth defence industry, upholding and participating directly in a financial system that is designed to enable the extreme accumulation of wealth and growing inequality, with all the harms and consequences that that brings. We're polishing our halos with the 4%, and with the other 96% of our money is being funnelled into markets and property portfolios that sustain inequality. And I think this is really problematic. We're making a mistake. We see our identities as funders of the change. The change happens somewhere else, we fund it. Rather than recognising our own organisations with their considerable endowments are actors in that ecosystem of change themselves. What we do matters. How we behave matters. And actually what I see instead in this space is all the innovation coming from this world of private wealth, the family offices, new younger generations of wealth holders who are organising in groups like Resource Justice, Resource Generation. They're showing up in networks like the Impact and Generation Pledge, and they're charting a new path, showing how money can be put in service of community and ecological wealth building via models that go way, way beyond social and impact investing as we talk about them now. And I can only see these trends growing because of the great wealth transfer which is coming our way. It's worth £7 trillion in the UK alone. God knows what it is globally. So where's institutional philanthropy in this picture? Stroking its chin about whether to spend down, patting itself on the back for some slightly average impact investing. It's just not good enough. Anyway, as you can probably tell, I would go on about this for a long time. We're doing a lot of work on our own endowment at JRF, but I think I'm out of time. So 3 things to conclude. The evidence is mounting about the systemic risks of our current economic models and the need to move beyond them. There's a growing network of organisations. We mapped this last year, 2,000 organisations in the UK alone, building post-capitalist futures and demonstrating how things could look different. And they're surviving on breadcrumbs because we don't fund them, because they don't fit into our models of funding. And I see an emerging ecosystem of wealth holders recognising that how money flows and where it flows to can and must change if our children are going to have a future. I don't see UK institutional philanthropy in this picture, so that's why I'm on this side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Beth. 2 powerful, but we could say contrasting perspectives on institutional philanthropy's response. I think it might be worth considering the balance that Sophia referred to about what the balance is, right, and the direction of travel towards progress that Beth was referring to. So it's now an opportunity for you to suggest where you stand on this debate. Be interested to hear what your views are on the practical actions that philanthropy can take, current challenges, opportunities, and your views. We'll then offer a response to both of you. We'll also call up Manny and Sarah for their closing statements, so we'll have about 25 minutes or so now. So who would like to kick off. Now we've got the microphone coming. If anyone wants to raise their hand, there's this time a gentleman at the back and a gentleman third from the back. If either of you want to go ahead. And feel free to introduce yourself and say where you stand.
Right. My name is Bosman, and I work for Solidaridad, which is a global civil society organization. We work a lot with philanthropy. We work with smallholder farmers. And I must say that in terms of impact of philanthropy, in fact, British philanthropy, it seems the answer is quite obvious. It is a big yes. We have seen significant change in the lives of farmers, in the lives of those who are down, to nothing. They are down with poverty. Without philanthropy, it will be very, very difficult for them to make a decent living. Now we are seeing how the impact of philanthropy's investment is really contributing to something significant. But there is a lot of confidence building in philanthropy. In fact, most individuals believe in philanthropy more than government. And that is why it is not surprising that philanthropy is receiving more funding, like Beth said. But it's also true that to whom much is given, more will be expected or demanded. And so there is now the question about how do I assess funding around philanthropy? Where is it? And how transparent is it in terms of the distribution of the resources? How equitable is it? So there seems to be some blackness on these very questions that need addressing. And finally, there is also the question about what challenge are we actually talking about? Because that is a theme. Is British philanthropy rising to the challenge? Exactly what challenge are we talking about? It seems it is important that we have some intelligence that is able to detect new and emerging challenges, and that is also able to rise to these and emerging challenges. I'm not sure whether the philanthropy setup as we have it has that kind of is able to rise to that need. So I would need some reflection on that from both of you. But in terms of whether it is working, yes, I stay with Beth, but there are significant challenges that have to be addressed, as Sophia has also mentioned.
Thank you so much. A real double-edged sword there in terms of where one might stand, but we'll give you the opportunity to come back. We've got gentlemen there and then gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Reza Afshar. I run an organisation called Independent Diplomat. And I'll only talk about the abroad part of this because it's the only thing I know anything about. And caveat it with, I think philanthropy is an amazing thing. It does great things all over the world and at home. But I think, the question, and the previous commenter has sort of alluded to this, the question sort of, are we rising to the challenge, is the wrong question. Like, why have we not anticipated the challenge? And definitely when we talk about what's happening abroad, all of the challenges that we're facing are very easy to anticipate and very clearly coming down the pipe. And we're not set up then to address those challenges, rather people are responding to those challenges. And so that gets you to the point where you are dealing with consequences instead of dealing with, as Sophia says, root causes. I think in the peace and security sector, it's a tiny sector of giving. And when you sort of put that little into the problem and then scratch your head and wonder why there's a genocide in Gaza, or why there's a massive humanitarian crisis in Sudan, or why we haven't dealt with the problems emanating from Myanmar, these problems are just going to keep adding up and stacking up unless we address them appropriately. And I think we're not even putting the funding into the sectors that would deal with those, and then to do it from a perspective of root causes. A couple of other things I would say is, as well as I think dealing too much with consequence and not enough with root cause, I think we're also, the sector is very risk averse. I think there isn't enough boldness. There's an aversion to doing work that's risky, but it's also an area, philanthropy, where that appetite should be there and could be there, because it's not the same as governments and so on. And then finally, the classic unrestricted problem versus restricted problem. You know, we have been very lucky in one particular case where we have had a giver who has given some funding on some work we do on Ukraine. And he allowed us, rather than to provide a project proposal, simply to think, take the money and figure out what to do. We tried a few different things, and 6 months later we hit upon a very impactful way of doing things. That kind of vision, to be able to be like, I don't know what the answer to the problem is, but I know some people who might know what the answer is. I'm just going to give them some money, see what happens, and then we can, once they hit upon it, you know, we can get into KPIs and all the rest of it. And I think that sort of that kind of philanthropy is extremely hard to come by. We came by it by luck. And I think, you know, again, across the sector, thinking more in terms of how to enable people to think creatively and problem solve.
Thank you. Sounds like at least one philanthropist rising to the challenge there. And one just not British. Well, just on that, you might just want to consider, and there's a point for consideration before we go to the next speaker, there's a lot of challenges to load on the shoulders of philanthropy, and the question might be, is British philanthropy doing better than other philanthropy sectors in other countries in trying to address some of them? And that might be a judgment that you would like to take in a short while. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Richard Berridge. I work for the International Crane Foundation. We save cranes and the places cranes dance. And I wanted to ask a similar question to my friend from Solidaridad, with whom we work in Zambia, and the last speaker about root causes. And I wanted to ask whether the British philanthropy sector is prioritising rightly, or how the British philanthropy sector is prioritising. Because yes, I would certainly say root causes can yield a greater impact over time. And so I would just ask, you'd expect me to ask this because I work for a biodiversity NGO, you'd expect me to ask whether British philanthropy is doing enough to prioritise biodiversity and climate change, because there's so many good issues that so many good people are working on in this room. We've talked about the poly crisis, but I would argue, I would suggest that if we don't fix the biodiversity and the climate crisis, all those other issues will also get fixed, because everything will get fixed, because it'll be one big disaster.
So just to ask you then, just come back, because we do want your opinion. On biodiversity, we've been hearing about British philanthropy's contribution on climate change. Do you think that British philanthropy is doing a better job than others on addressing biodiversity issues, or not?
It depends who you're comparing with. I think we've got more we can do, definitely more we can do. My organisation gets a lot of funding from the US. We were founded in the US, so I guess that makes sense. But I think Britain can rise to that level. Yeah, I think that's my question.
Thank you. No, thank you, and thank you to all of you. There's a person at the back, and then we're going to go back to Beth and to Sophia. So back there, yeah, just in front of Kit.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm not going to stand up. My name's Elora, and I'm from the Funders for Race Equality Alliance, also known as FREA. I think I just wanted to make a point around scrutiny, which some funders are quite scared of and sometimes see it as quite a negative thing. I think that scrutiny is quite an important and wonderful thing. I think it shows that power dynamics are slowly being broken down, especially between the race equality sector and funders, where the race equality sector is able to speak up to funders about where they should be doing better. I think that it's a time for funders to continue to be more bold and active in what they say, and they have so much more freedom and flexibility than the government, and therefore can take quite bold stances. And I feel like philanthropy could lead us in taking these bolder stances and taking strong anti-racist directions. And with the whole thing around scrutiny, things around looking at funders' pasts and talking about reparations of the fact that actually a lot of British philanthropy is built on the slave trade. I think it's hard to talk about the positives of British philanthropy unless we're talking about where a lot of the money has originally come from. Yeah, that's my
Thank you for bringing that up. And a whole range of questions from climate to race to global conflict for philanthropy to grapple with, including here. So with those contributions, and thank you, there will be time maybe for a little bit more in a moment. I just want to go back to first Beth and then Sophia just for a couple of minutes just to respond to what you're hearing.
Sure, thanks very much. Thanks a lot for all those strong points and that people have been making. Look, I think what I'm hearing is the need for more nuance. Debates are artificial, aren't they? I'm about to move to Oxford where they love this kind of thing, and I'm not sure I do really. It's not a sport, is it? Like pretending you fully believe A and you fully disagree with B. So I think we're a much more grown-up room than that. We can see, Manny and Sophia made loads of great points, and so let's just sort of bring in some more nuance. And the few bits of nuance I'd like to say, one of them is that tax and donations are not binaries. This comes up so often in criticisms of philanthropy, not so much today, but I felt it around the edges of some of the conversations I was having before and during lunch. As if those of us who defend philanthropy and promote philanthropy are saying, and we'd like that at the expense of lower tax bills and government can step away. No. You can have crowding in, not crowding out. Sometimes the more people support a cause, the more government says there's votes in this, or the public who are here to serve care about this. Nothing good ever happens just with one source of funding. It's always a combination. Many of the examples that I gave, it's not the case that only philanthropy funded any of them. It's always partnerships with different tiers of government and with different bits of business. But the philanthropic funding is essential, sometimes because it goes early, because it takes the risk, as somebody said quite rightly, that's its kind of special power. But the role of philanthropy goes alongside tax, which everyone should be paying. It's not, so I think that's one bit of nuance. Tax and donations go together. Another one that did come up more just in that little round of points was about amelioration versus root causes. I've never met a philanthropist, and I've interviewed quite a lot in the 20 years I've been studying this, who says, I'm just here for the sticking plasters. Don't tell me why this problem's here to begin with. I just want to keep pouring money in to solve it temporarily and then come back next year and ask for some more money and I'll stick a few more sticking plasters on. Of course they don't think that, but they do see immediate need. So they're not going to only fund root causes, because right now there's a kid who's hungry, right now there's somebody who's unhoused. It's not unsophisticated to do both, in fact arguably the opposite. So I think we need to stop beating up on people for doing one or the other. They go together, and that's again a bit of nuance we could bring into the debate.
But what about the point that the balance might be wrong between those two?
I think, that actually wonderfully takes me to the third, because I think actually the responsibility for all of this is on both sides of the giving and asking equation. And I think that we need to think about, and I consider myself, from the fundraising world, that's where I began. I fundraised for 10 years. You have to fundraise as an academic for your own research and for your own centre. What are we asking for money for? Is it easier to say, could you fund this food parcel, than it is to say, actually, we need to do this campaigning and advocacy and lobbying work to make the change? Philanthropists, tend to be looking for, they respond to requests quite often, and they respond to the narrative we give them about how the world can be changed. So let's examine our own kind of fundraising consciences. Are we putting forward a 20-30 year plan for how to solve this problem? Are we talking about how to change the whole basis on which society is run? Or are we just desperate, understandably, for the donation will just keep us going and pay the salary bill and pay the rent? So I think that's part of the answer, is we've got to be careful what we're asking for. So all of that is to say, I do still expect to lose. I really do, because I think that people here just won't bring it in themselves to say everything's fine. When I'm not, we're not saying that. But can I ask you one thing before I stop? If anything that me and Sarah have said has landed, that you've thought, actually, yeah, philanthropy is collaborating, or philanthropy has had these successes, maybe when you leave this room and you're back out with your colleagues, or your auntie who doesn't understand philanthropy, or your neighbour who's complaining about charities being badly run, or whatever it might be, maybe think about defending philanthropy. Maybe think about saying, do you know what? But what about this thing that's for the better? What about these changes? And that's how we make changes. Don't forward that meme in which somebody's mocking the latest philanthropist. Don't repeat something you've heard on the grapevine about some philanthropists behaving badly without fact-checking it first. If we can all just think about the messages we're sending out about philanthropy, then I think slowly we can rehabilitate the reputation of philanthropy, and there will be more and better giving to rise to the challenge. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm totally with you on the nuance. I'm much more comfortable in a field of grey than the black and white. And I do, I completely agree with you. But of course, no one is in the business of only root causes or only amelioration. But I do think it is the balance that I'm interested in naming, because I don't think it is quite right. And I suppose that goes to your point, Laura, about boldness. I think one of the wonderful things about working in philanthropy is this freedom from cycles, freedom from political cycles, from the media cycle, from financial reporting cycles. So the opportunity to think in much longer timeframes and take bolder moves that might take longer to come to fruition. And I wonder how much we really appreciate that. So thinking about the things we appreciate about philanthropy, for me, one of the things I think I will take away from today is that sense of we have an opportunity to think long term, and therefore we should be thinking boldly and long term and allowing time for the moves to have an impact. But that might also mean that we can't point to impact straight away. And I think that's where it gets tricky. And this brings me to my second point. A couple of you were talking about, it's quite hard to get that focus on root cause, on longer term change. I think that's true, because I think, like every human being, people in philanthropy like concrete stuff, and they like a sense of doing things. And that quite often structures what gets funded. So projects where we can see the impact. And what I'm really noticing in our work at Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where I'm responsible for the part of our strategy which is about supporting and shielding the new, that's my bit, is that actually a lot of that work of supporting and shielding the new isn't only concrete projects. It's about relationships, it's about growing trust, it's about the spaces between organisations, the spaces for collaboration so that people can come together around ambitions that are bigger than their organisations alone. And so I think part of this appreciation of the privilege of working in philanthropy, of being able to take that longer term view, is also being able to fund those things that are perhaps less visible, less tangible, less concrete, less immediate. And I guess my challenge is, are we really embracing that freedom that we have in philanthropy that really doesn't exist anywhere else that I have ever worked anyway? I think, one other thing just on the biodiversity and kind of where's that at. I mean, for me, I think if we're talking about the polycrisis, it doesn't make sense to separate out people and planet. Like the polycrisis, the damage is to both. And so when I'm talking about polycrisis, I think it is really about being accountable to people and planet and our relationship with nature. And for me, this is why it's so difficult to think about impact only in programme terms. We have to think about it as the full endowment, because the scale of investment needed is so great.
Thank you very much. Lots to consider, but we are coming closer to the point of judgment. I'd like to call Manny and Sarah back to the stage. Sarah, if you come and sit next to Beth, and Manny next to Sophia. Before they give some concluding comments, this is an opportunity to ask any of our speakers, any of our advocates, questions or raise viewpoints based on the very high quality of the discussion and debate we've been hearing, which is a real tribute to all of you. So thank you for that. There are questions. 3 women, 1, 2 and 3. Elika's just going to come with microphones.
Hi, Charlotte from Pro Bono Economics. Just wondering, now that we're seeing government starting to collaborate or be more open to collaboration with philanthropists through the Impact Economy Collective and kind of other initiatives, are there things that you would like to see from government to help British philanthropy meet the new challenges they're facing better?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Olivia and I'm with Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. This question was for Sarah, talking about the funders' commitment to climate change. How is it that they're monitored? So what happens if an organisation does not align with what they've signed or agreed to? How is this enforced and monitored, and are there any consequences to that?
Good question about scrutiny there. And we've got one more here, and if there's anyone on this side, this person there, we'll take a couple more.
Hello, my name's Michaela, I'm from the British Red Cross. I think my question was actually for somebody in the room who asked earlier about, or suggested earlier about not needing philanthropists, the idea of, I guess, government being there, so like charities aiming not to be there. And I kind of want to reverse that, because I kind of feel like philanthropy gives a chance for so many different points of views. It's almost so diverse, and I think with government you don't have that, and then you've got the dangers. If you are so heavily government funded, then you can't make decisions independent from that. And I feel our philanthropy is ahead of the game in that. At the Red Cross, I was chatting with somebody who grew up in Italy, who used to work for the Italian Red Cross, and they are heavily funded by their government, which questions what are they allowed to talk about when issues arise in Italy. I just thought it was a very interesting discussion. So I guess it's a yes from my bigger question of this. But
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, I feel a bit bad asking a second or making a second point as I did earlier. So Christina, again, from Contact Support Families for Disabled Children. I really liked, Beth, the point you made about charities. We need to be not just talking about the programmes and like sort of saying, actually, no, we need to fund the whole. And I guess the other side of that is on funders as well, because understandably, in order to you have to create some boundaries on your giving. And then that ends up with different funding streams, but that in itself can create challenges. So if you're a charity, like many, we provide support on the ground to meet immediate needs, but we're also working to influence policy, and even those on the ground needs are very, they cross into different pots of funding, I suppose you could say. We support families with disabled children, but that also works with very marginalised communities. That also, we talk about poverty in general. We might be talking about different localities. So I guess what I'm asking to funders is to consider how are the pots that you're creating, what's the word I'm looking for? They're kind of codifying those barriers rather than enabling a charity to make a real change by giving us the freedom to do what we need to do to address the whole picture.
Thank you very much. I think I've got very quick, I can see there's other people who really enjoy and appreciate having perspectives from all of you. So we'll just try and get a couple in, and then we'll go Sarah and Manny over there.
Hi, thanks. Nicola Banks from One World Together and University of Manchester. Beth, you started off with a point that we've not discussed, and I think we should discuss it in a debate like this, that the trust among the public and the donations that the British public are giving are on the decline. And I think we need to ask, what is the role of philanthropy in that? As the system has created more and more wealth that is poured into the NGO sector, it's kind of taken them away from this accountability to take the public with us as we have these new conversations and new directions. The need for systems change, not sticking plasters. Where are those conversations happening, and how is philanthropy supporting that?
Thank you, and I think one or two more just behind you, and then...
Hello, my name is Barbara Weichwein. I lead community investment at United Saint Saviours. I have a question for you, Sophia, about the balance. If you look at the new strategies coming out, John Ellerman, Henry Smith, City Bridge, I mean, any new strategy of the last 200 that have been closed in the last 2 years comes back with economic justice, racial equality, all the right kind of campaigning topics that I think are so crucial what you're talking about. What's your confidence in how the balance is shifting?
That might be a question to take up after the vote, because now we're going to hear from Sarah, who's going to make some closing comments, and you want to take the floor up there, and then Manny, and then after that will be your opportunity to decide. You'll see QR code on your lanyard, which we'll go to in a moment. But Sarah, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm not going to be able to answer some of those specific questions, but happy to have a chat afterwards. They were all great questions. But just in conclusion, again, I would say philanthropy is rising, absolutely. to the challenges and is doing something that the state and others cannot do. And it's that combination of philanthropy, the state, the markets that's absolutely critical. I would reiterate that we need more and better philanthropy. That is absolutely the most crucial part. And we need, a combination of funders. And that what we are doing with discussions like this one is shining a light on ourselves and pushing ourselves to go further and faster and better. And there are a whole range of ways of doing that. And I was just thinking back to something that we do within my foundation. We started something about 10 years ago called Development Partners. We were funding lots of good stuff, lots of sticking plaster stuff around women who have experienced domestic violence. So we were doing lots of frontline grassroots stuff, great. But we weren't thinking about the system. We are not experts in it. So we thought, what if we bring together a group of organizations, women with lived experience, the police, social services, and put them in a room, give them a lot of money over 5 years to just sit and talk together. They know best. They know what's wrong with the system, and we're in the middle of that now. We're about 3 years in, and they are redesigning the system locally to support women who are part of that world. So that's an example of where we are doing both, and I think that is where we should probably be placing our emphasis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Manny.
So I think we've had lots of calls for philanthropy to be bold, so we should be bold and declare this debate null and void. Or abstain, because obviously, as we've heard, it is false. And we are, I think, all on the same team. And I think one of the problems our sector has a little bit too much of is we fight amongst ourselves. But anyway, you've heard from our side, I think, different critiques, but a fundamental core, which is that the balance of funding is wrong. Too much towards ameliorating poverty, filling the gaps that government has left, and not enough towards supporting long-term change. And wherever you sit on this, the three horizons of post-capitalism, tinkering with capitalism, maintaining the status quo, I think we can agree that what's needed, if you're going to move up that ladder, is to shift power to communities, to give them the resources they need, and to use all of our resources to hold those who keep communities where they are to account. So our argument is we're just not doing enough.
All right, well, first of all, thank you to all of our advocates for what has been passionate, expert perspectives, lots of insights, lots to reflect on. Yes, there might be points of consensus, but I think there are clear differences that have been articulated, and we want you to adjudicate on those differences in relation to this motion. Then we can go back to the clubbable as well as fighting that we sometimes have within our sector as we try to improve it. So on your lanyard, and in the of those joining online, there's lots of people joining from the live stream, there'll be a link as well. You'll be able to vote by just going onto the QR code there. And we're asking you to vote on the motion of, is British philanthropy rising to the challenge at home and abroad? You can vote as well.
We can vote as well.
If you don't have Wi-Fi, it's education. It's guest Wi-Fi, education with a capital E. 123 is the Wi-Fi. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to vote. Is philanthropy rising, British philanthropy rising to the challenge at home and abroad? Yes or no? And one innovation while you're doing that is, unlike in the House of Commons, and we have electronic voting here, so philanthropy pioneering that particular change, assuming that it works, and we can register everyone's votes digitally. Well, this is the nail-biting moment for all of you and for us to maybe just while we're waiting, I can just include a few votes of thanks, so we don't do it afterwards. It might be a good moment just while we're counting the scores. But thank you, obviously, to all our speakers. As I say, you've done a really great job of reflecting on the different arguments, setting out your stalls, but also modelling constructive exchange. So I think it's a real credit to all of you, so thank you for that. Also want to thank our sponsors, the Anglo-American Foundation, and thank you for your support, Michael, and the team there. The Living Wage Foundation, who highlighted work that can be done by foundations to make sure that charities are being able to pay the living wage. Aga Khan Foundation Centre, they've hosted us for many events, and we're always grateful to their help. And to the team at the Association of Charitable Foundations, it's been really good to work with you. Thank you, Catherine, and to all the team for your partnership on this event. I hope it can be the first of many more. And most of all to the Alliance team, really hard-working team that worked together to put this event together, including our events manager, Jodie, who's been working really hard to make sure this is a successful event. So thank you to Jodie Vickery. Perhaps we can have a round of applause for her. And just before I read the results, at Alliance, we are a media charity, so we're a UK registered charity. We're looking for new trustees, particularly those with expertise in European philanthropy, media publishing, and you can talk to me or one of the team. It's David here, our executive director. You can talk to him if you want to know more about that. We're inviting submissions until the end of this month. Now it's the 1st of July, so till the end of July. For advertising, if you want to reach philanthropy leaders with your message, you can advertise with us as well. And subscriptions, if you want 50% off a copy of this magazine and all our other products, then you can get that. And there's leaflets which will give you access to that 50% discount for those of you who aren't already subscribers. And we do have a lot of premium content, both in print but also online, that we share about what's happening in philanthropy. So just wanted to share those things. Before we end the event, in a moment you can go off and talk to one another, get some cold drink, but the answer you've all been waiting for and have contributed to, we believe that British philanthropy is rising to the challenge at home and abroad. Yes, 38%. No, 61%. So the motion is rejected. Congratulations for the debate we've been having today, and thank you all for joining us.